Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Happy birthday to America. You can say it with me. Ready? Happy birthday! All righty. Nice. We've been at this for this, we figured this is our 12th year. We actually didn't write it down or put up a concrete monument or anything, but we've been at this. And you'll be hearing Lou Levinson here in a little bit for just a brief few moments, but he's been the prime mover for this whole thing. And we're trying to turn this into a whole national movement. And I think with your help, it wouldn't be that hard with the internet we have today. We're here to publicly read the Declaration of Independence, something that I'm told, or it's my understanding, that every town did in this country at one time. Now, the best we can find out, it's a mere handful. I've heard 40, I've heard 60. We don't know. How do you survey something like that? Do your own investigation, and I think you'll find out that it's embarrassingly low. If we can't talk about Americans' birth certificate on America's birthday, you fill in the blank, okay? I got to tell you one other, I'm going to have to say negative thing. A year ago, we've got, by the way, copies of the Declaration of Independence for all of you. We'll be handing them out later, okay? I'll probably be giving them to Michael, that camera guy over there, and he'll be giving them to you. But I went to put up a little kiosk in the post office here in Payson, and they said, no, you can't do that. What do you mean? I mean, they've got, voters registration, a thing about cars, and I mean, you look at all the literature in there, but they can't have the birth certificate of our nation in there. And on the front, it says, take me, I'm yours. The Declaration of Independence. It belongs to all of us, right? And I wasn't going to charge. And they said no. So once again, you fill in the blank. What does that mean to us today? We're here to revive and support the Patriot movement that a number of them did years ago, the founders. And when we look at their personalities and what they did, there wasn't a clone among them. There wasn't a carbon copy. And if you look around here right now, nobody else looks like you. We're all individuals. Some of us are weird, some of us are strange, some of us are spectacular, but we're all Americans. And they wanted us all to have this freedom, this liberty. Last year we had about 94 people here. I'm guessing we've got double that. I'm hoping somebody does a count. But don't be walking around, marking stuff off. Just stay with the program, okay? That's about it for me at this point. I just want to remind you that equal liberty for all, that's a thought to keep in mind. Another thought is that we're all average people. We're not here to be on TV. We're not spectacular. We're not major politicians. We're average Americans. As a matter of fact, one of your speakers this morning is going to be a naturalized American as of 3 years ago. Okay, so we can do this. So for first, we've got about, I think it's 4 speakers, and we're going to have a couple others just stand up for a minute to give the historical context of what was going on, the powers and the forces that were at work and so forth. I'd like to introduce you to Perry Klein. She'll be speaking from the lectern over there.
Thank you. The Declaration of Independence was not written on a whim in response to perceived injustices, but after many years of oppression by the British King and Parliament. Life in the colonies was not easy, but the colonists had carved out a good life in the New World. By 1763, the French and Indian War was over, and an economic slump followed. So the King and Parliament decided they could dip into the colonists' pockets. In 1764, the Sugar Act and the Currency Act were passed and were highly resented by the colonists. These acts were protested, and the protests were ignored by the King and Parliament. The following year, more acts were passed, including the Stamp Act, to help defray the costs of keeping troops in America. This act imposed a tax on many types of printed materials used in the colonies, and was seen by the colonists as a violation of their rights. Violent demonstrations in several colonies ensued, and the Virginian House of Burgesses adopted the Virginia Resolves that claimed under British law Virginians could only be taxed by an assembly which they had elected representatives. Most of the protests fell on deaf ears, and the King and Parliament continued further insults, including enacting the Quartering Act, forcing colonists to house, feed, and provide other provisions to the British troops, an act that was mostly resisted or circumvented in many colonies. In 1767, the Townshend Acts were passed by Parliament, placing duties on many items imported into America. By this time, protests were mounting and the leaders evolving. The Massachusetts House of Representatives began a campaign against the acts by sending a petition to the King asking for a repeal of the acts. At the same time, the Massachusetts House sent the Massachusetts Circular Letter to other colonial assemblies, asking for them to join the resistance movement, and called for a boycott of merchants importing the affected goods. This action came to the notice of Lord Hillsborough, the new colonial secretary in England. His response was to send letters to the colonial governors, British appointees, instructing them to dissolve any colonial assemblies elected by the colonists that responded to the circular letter. He also instructed the Massachusetts governor, Francis Bernard, to direct Massachusetts House to rescind the letter. The House refused to comply. Slowly, other assemblies began to support the letter and the boycott of British goods. By September of 1768, at a town meeting in Boston, the town residents were urged to arm themselves. Later in September, 2 regiments of English infantry landed in Boston and set up permanent residence to keep order. There were several more skirmishes over the next year or so. The most notable was the Boston Massacre in March of 1770. The Boston Massacre started with an apprentice harassing a soldier on guard duty. It quickly escalated with more citizens and troops joining the fray. A soldier overreacted and began to shoot at the citizens without order from his commanding officer, who had been sent to control the situation. It was estimated that by this time there were 300 or 400 people there. 11 men were hit, 3 died instantly. 3 more were fatally wounded. Most of the crowd moved away from the immediate area but continued to grow in nearby streets. The commanding officer called out most of the regiment, and the acting governor, Thomas Hutchison, was called to the scene. He assured the crowd a fair inquiry into the shootings if the crowd dispersed. An investigation was done, and the 8 soldiers, the commanding officer on the scene, and 4 civilians were indicted for murder. The trial was delayed, and the regiment was moved out of the province because of the ongoing high tensions in Boston. Not content with the slow-moving justice, the local media and engravers published accounts of the massacre and artistic interpretations of the scene. The media at the time were more interested in stirring up the colonists than total accuracy. One example was the complaint that customs officials were abandoning their posts because of the danger, when in fact only one official left Boston to carry Governor Hutchinson's dispatches about the situation to London. Many of the dispatches sought to blame Bostonians for denying the validity of parliamentary laws. The dispatches also blamed the city's citizens for the lawlessness preceding the event, claiming that they set up an ambush of the soldiers. The trial of the soldiers opened in November of 1770, and a number of the defendants were actually defended by John Adams. 6 were acquitted, 2 were found guilty of manslaughter because there was overwhelming evidence that they had fired directly into the crowd. Over the next 5 years, there were further conflicts, including one of the best known, the Boston Tea Party, in December of 1773. The target was the Tea Act, which allowed the British East India Company to sell tea from China in the American colonies without paying taxes apart from those imposed by the Townshend Act. American patriots strongly opposed the Taxes in the Townsend Act as a violation of their rights. Colonists objected to the Tea Act because they believed it was a violation of their rights as Englishmen to no taxation without representation. The colonists believed they could only be taxed by their own elected representatives, not by a British Parliament in which they were not represented. Demonstrators, some disguised as Native Americans, destroyed an entire shipment of tea sent by the East India Company. They boarded the ships and threw the chests of tea into the Boston harbor. The British government responded harshly, and the episode escalated into the American Revolution. 4 months later, on April 19, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord were the start of the Revolutionary War. The British were concerned about the powder and weapons that the colonists had acquired and set out to seize and destroy the caches of weapons. Excuse me. This incident was later termed the shot heard round the world, and to this day it is not known exactly who fired that shot. The citizens met the redcoats and proceeded to defend their rights. The Revolutionary Army harassed the retreating British infantry all the way to Boston, using every tree and rock to hide behind to shoot at the marching infantry. There were more skirmishes with wins on both sides, and in May of 1775, the Continental Congress met. This was the second one. The people really did not wish to fight with King George. They preferred to be considered British citizens and accorded all the rights of the British citizens in England. The king, in late 1775, rejected the request to repeal the Coercive Acts, a series of intolerable laws passed by Parliament. The king wrote to the Prime Minister, Lord North, "Blows must decide whether they are to be subject to this country or independent." The king was determined to enforce parliamentary supremacy in America. The colonists objected. Some delegates to the Second Continental Congress hoped for eventual independence, but few actively advocated for that path. They still hoped to reconcile with the king, but the second petition was rejected. King George issued a proclamation of rebellion and announced before Parliament in October of 1775 that he was considering friendly offers of foreign assistance to suppress the rebellion. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet, Common Sense, as it was becoming clear in the colonies that the king was not inclined to act as a conciliator. Paine argued for independence and advocated a republican form of government as an alternative to monarchy and hereditary rule. The publication of this pamphlet greatly increased public support for separation from Great Britain, especially after Parliament had passed the Prohibitory Act, which established a blockade of American ports and declared American ships to be enemy vessels. John Adams believed that Parliament had effectively declared American independence with that act. Support for declaring independence grew even more than it was confirmed that King George had hired German mercenaries to use against his American subjects. Congress, unfortunately, did not have clear authority to declare independence. Many delegates returned to their colonial homes to advocate for the authority to do so. Meanwhile, Congress appointed a committee to draft a preamble to explain the purpose of the resolution. John Adams wrote the preamble, which stated that King George had rejected reconciliation and was hiring mercenaries to suppress the rebellion in the colonies. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia presented a three-part resolution to Congress on June 7th. John Adams seconded the resolution and called upon Congress to declare independence. It was Lee's resolution that became the basis for much of the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. It read in part, "Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved." There was much debate about this resolution, but eventually Congress decided that a committee should prepare a document announcing and explaining independence in the event that Lee's resolution was approved when it was brought up again in July. The various delegates returned to their local governments for further instructions and approvals. By the end of June, most of the colonies had endorsed the proposed concept of declaring independence, so a committee of 5 was formed to draft the declaration. No committee notes were taken, so later accounts were contradictory. It is known that Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write the first draft. The committee presented the document to Congress on June 28, 1776. The Congress edited the document over the next 2 days, shortening the document, removing unnecessary wording, and improving sentence structure. After more speeches, the vote was taken. And on July 2, 1776, the Resolution of Independence was adopted, and the colonies officially severed political ties with Great Britain. Several more changes were made to the wording of the Declaration of Independence, and this document was approved on July 4, 1776.
Thank you, Perry. It's nice to hear a clear woman's voice for a patriotic movement, isn't it? Let's give her another hand. Now I'd like to introduce, if you'd like to start making your way to the lectern, sir, the prime mover of this entire movement. And I should mention also that he'll have a little table back there. We'll talk about that a little bit, but those tables are patriot movements of different sorts, different personalities, and he'll have one. I'll let him explain it to you. And now, Lou Levinson.
Thank you, Bruce. After listening to what we just heard, I have to ask the question. I want to ask the question, how many heard that in all the history you were given to learn in school? Can I see a show of hands? I count 3 hands have heard that kind of history. I think there's a commentary there appropriate for our educational system. I have a few words to say. These I just picked up this morning, courtesy of Bill Sano, who sent me an email of what he hopes will be published in the local paper. I think I may be pessimistic about how much of it gets published. I'm going to read it to you today because I think it is absolutely appropriate and consistent and important. The 4th of July was originally intended as the day people gathered to hear the reading of the document, which was effectively the mission statement for governance for 13 very different colonies. The Battle of Lexington and Concord had occurred April 19th, 1775. The war had already begun in 1776. It ended formally with the Treaty of Paris in September of 1783, and we celebrate on the 4th, forgetting how the world looked to them on July 4th of 1776. The prospects for freedom were dark when Jefferson penned the words, "War against the greatest power on earth, the British Empire, was deemed to be a lost cause, an impossible battle for untrained farmers. Hardened professional soldiers were stationed in various parts of their homeland, and the Declaration of Independence was written in short and precise language. It's still admired for its elegance, power, and truth, and it was approved by men who understood the reality they face. they signed, accepting the consequences of their actions. In towns across America, tiny and large, people gathered to listen as the news arrived. The Declaration was read in its entirety. Silence prevailed as the words rang out. And these were people whose lives were often harsh. They faced war with no illusions. No end was in sight. The task facing them was far more daunting than what faces us today. The Declaration defined the mission which brought people together, willing to work, fight, or die as needed. They were people used to governing themselves. Many dreamed of justice and freedom for everyone, and we still hold this vision today, of people who truly govern themselves locally. After the Declaration was passed on July 2nd and read in Philadelphia on the 4th, it took a long time for copies to be transported and read throughout the colonies, now each a sovereign state. Well, July 4th is one day. Read the Declaration often. Though our oppressor is no longer located in Buckingham Palace, the mission enunciated in this, the foundation of our government, remains to be realized. Read it carefully. Consider your actions when the time comes and choose wisely. Thank you. Bruce?
Thank you, Lou. Appreciate all you've done, and I know you want to do more. Make sure you see him at his little table back there. Next, we're gonna get the meat and the potatoes here right now. The Declaration of Independence. We're gonna talk about equality and all that, but we're gonna have a woman read that too. How about that, huh? Come on, Natalie. How'd you? And by the way, those blankets are put there for a reason. Feel free to move them, use them. There are more empty chairs up front.
I wanted to thank Bruce for inviting me to be here today. I'm a naturalized citizen of about 10 years plus, and this is really truly an honor for me to be reading this declaration to you. I firmly believe that the most dangerous thing we can do as people is forget our history. So, okay, here we go. The unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to the right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspending in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with their measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of the new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their office and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us all in cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their own country. To bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as a free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. She's a business owner too. She runs the herb stop with her mother up in Pine, way out in the wilderness. What is that, about 12 miles away? I took a couple of classes from them, and I had to take one class over. By choice, yeah. Having been familiar with the ministerial duties of ministering in the Lutheran Church, you're supposed to take a text and then expound upon it, okay? So I'm not going to take a lot of time, maybe 8 minutes if we're lucky. But the text being what we just heard, I just want to pull out some points as to what the founders accomplished, and you can read between any lines you wish. But the biggest thing they spoke of was equality. We could get off on that subject, I guess. I don't want to, but equality amongst everybody. That it comes with our humanity. We're human. So we're done with that discussion. We are free. liberty and justice for all is what you just said over the hill over there. I think the Declaration of Independence makes it clear that we are all 100% free. We are all 100% accountable. And 100% of government's job is to make sure we're 100% free and 100% accountable. I believe that's your Declaration of Independence in a nutshell. Liberty and justice for all. We'll talk about all in a minute. Who does this apply to? Who gets to be free? Who gets to be individuals? Who gets to stand on their own and make their own decisions, determine their own destinies? Just people that are self-sufficient, full-grown, mature people? People that can think in a straight line? How about children? How about the unborn? How about the senile? How about the people that just can't seem to make a business work? How many of us are really self-sufficient then? Is that, if that's what qualifies us for being 100% free? I'm going to say we all need each other. Our president, whether I'm for or against him, doesn't matter. Is he a standalone guy? My understanding is that he's had some failures. Who among us then is worthy of having 100% liberty? I'm going to say the idea is that none of us are. And yet that's what our founders fought for. And that's what we fight for every day. I'm no different than you in the fact that I'm different than you. We're all different. And we all deserve the chance. Whether we're born, whether we're senile, whether we're in a nursing home and breathing our last. All of us. Liberty and justice for all. That's what I get out of it. That's my exposition on that text. I would like to say one more thing. I believe it's attributed to Voltaire. And I think this is something we all need to keep in our hip pocket as we go about our lives while we are being polarized on the internet or TV, whatever. And he said, I think I'm quoting this correctly, I may disagree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. Put yourself in either one of those pronouns, huh? Instead of finding an excuse why we shouldn't be with certain people or why we don't agree with them, no, I acknowledge you're different, I'm different, we're looking at things differently. Let's sit down, let's make this work. One of the themes I came up with today that I didn't really mention at the beginning was unity through diversity. Let's keep that in mind. We're all equal, but we're all different. Thank you. We have one more speaker, and then a couple people I'll ask to stand up quickly just to let you know there are other movements besides political parties that are trying to fix this country. And I just want to point one more time to the folks back there. Let's see, there's the Libertarian Party. There's the, what do we got? The Convention of States movement. We got the Tea Party. I think there's one or two more. I'm going to have the stand from the Sons of American Revolution stand up in a minute. And then I believe it's Jan Nash with the Daughters of American Revolution. I have her stand up in a minute. But now it's our last speaker before we get into audience comments and questions. Gary, if you'd like to start making your way up here. This gentleman has spoken on this forum before. And his topic is what the founders endured, the price they paid. Thank you. Here's Gary.
Good morning. It's great to see you out here on this wonderful day of independence. Have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men that signed the Declaration of Independence? When they signed it, they stood tall, straight, unwavering, and they pledged for the support of this declaration with firm reliance on the protection of the divine promise of providence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors, tortured, and they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died from wounds or hardships during the Revolutionary War. They signed, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. What kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners. These were men of means and well-educated. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty, if they're captured, would be death. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ship swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home, his property to pay his debts, and died in rags. Thomas McLean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and his award was poverty. Vandals or soldiers looted the properties of Dillery, Hall, Clymer, Walton, Gannett, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home. That was his headquarters. Thomas Jefferson quietly urged General George Washington to open fire. Thomas Nelson. His own home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemies jailed his wife. She died within a few months. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and grist mills were laid to waste, and for more than a year he lived in the forest and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Norris and Livingston suffered similar fates. Such were the stories and the sacrifices of the American Revolution. They were not wild-eyed, rabble-rousing ruffians. They were soft-spoken men of means and education. They had security, but they valued liberty. They gave you and me a free and independent America. The history books never told you a lot about what happened in the Revolutionary War. We didn't just fight the British. We were British subjects at the time, and we fought our own government. Some of us take these liberties for granted. We shouldn't. So take a couple of minutes to remember the sacrifices paid so we could all live in a free and independent country. freedom is never really free. Take a few moments while enjoying your 4th of July holiday and reflect not only on these patriots, but especially on the men and women who have sacrificed their lives during all of our conflicts and those that are now fighting to keep you free. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. At this time, if you have a comment or a question, there's a microphone up here. We ask that you come up there. For one reason, we've got a camera trained on it so we can document this. If you have a patriotic comment or question, come on up here right now. Oh, I'm sorry. Stan Gardner, would you come on up and give a few words about Sons of the American Revolution? I told you I was going to introduce him, but I forgot. Stan Gardner, hold on.
Good morning. My name's Stan Garner. I'm a member of the Rim Country chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. And we do have a table here this morning. If anyone is interested in learning about these sons, then please stop by and see us. We're a patriotic organization established by descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution. And the establishment occurred over time between about 1876 at the time of the centennial and was formally created in the late 1890s. Our sister organization is the Daughters of the American Revolution. I'm dressed in the attire of a militia member from Massachusetts. My patriot was a Lieutenant John Adams, second cousin to President John Adams, and he fought at Bunker Hill, which was actually Breed's Hill because they got lost in the night and got on the wrong hill. But we all celebrate Bunker Hill. That was a pivotal battle because it held the British off. And they only quit when they ran out of powder and shot. They managed to get away for the most part. But if anyone's interested in the Sons of the American Revolution, please stop by and see us. Thank you.
And I'd like to ask Jan Nash to stand up. She's not going to talk, but go ahead and give her a hand. She's Daughters of the American Revolution. If you're interested, come and see her. Also, I've got copies of the Declaration of Independence. They're free. They cost me $0.10 each. I'm investing in you. Are you feeling guilty? No. Take them. Take more than one. What's going to happen to this movement? Last year, that was the 11th year, we had 97 people. I haven't counted, but I'm guessing it's double that here, or 150, something like that. What's going to happen? Start your own movement. Do your public reading on Declaration of Independence at your church, your bowling club, across the campfire when you're camping. Do it. Just do it. It doesn't require all of this. A few people, and to get the movement started. I'm counting on you. So if we don't see you next year, and I hope we do, be out there doing what we're doing. Okay? I should mention that Ukulele Fun is going to be over here behind this microphone. They're going to be playing songs, and they'll have a lot of sing-alongs. And you can go ahead and sing with them while all other people are meeting with these patriotic efforts at these tables. I'm going to go home and I'm going to go, man, I should have said that. Well, I'm going to go home and I'm going to say I should have said that. Let's continue to foster what the founders founded. Freedom and accountability for all. Liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I guess Lou wants to say a few words.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, I do want to say a few words. I think what you have seen here today, you might recall all the contacts you have who live someplace else other than Payson. I've been surprised for several years when there's people who tell me they came here from Phoenix this morning because of hearing the Declaration of Independence. Now those 3 or 4 people kind of stayed in the back of my mind. But I would suggest to you, to the 100 plus of you standing here who haven't left yet, is the best way to do something is simply to talk to your friends, your neighbors, your relatives who live someplace else in this country. I've done that the past few years, so I'm proud that there are at least 4 other states today read the Declaration of Independence than had before, simply because I asked somebody I knew, having seen what we do here, and realized how it is in here that we need to reach the heart. And you know those people who don't live here, who you know you wish were here, and let them know they can do this too, just the way we did it 12 or 13 years ago when we started, with a half a dozen people only sitting in front of me when we read the Declaration of Independence. Now, there's 100 plus that are here, and that's reaching us in the heart. I ask you to don't just walk away and keep it in your heart. Tell your children, tell your friends what you have experienced here, and encourage them to do it where they live. I know that this year the Declaration was read in 4 states that had not experienced that before. You can do it. Join me with that very personal commitment that you and only you can do. Talk to your friends, your children, and invite them to stand up and be the patriot that you want them to be. Thank you.
Did we have anybody that wanted to do some audience comments? Questions? Okay, let's move on to some fun, some music, find out some more information, get contact information, mission statements of these other patriots that are trying to do what they think is right. Thank you.